Dustin, that's calling in from Virginia. Yeah, Virginia. Dustin, what's going on?
West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Puck.
Hello. What's going on?
So I argue on the internet sometimes, usually
Don't
on
we
like
all?
more like text forums or chat or things like that. And sometimes I realize that it's become more of a debate or an argument, and I'd like to sort of shift it to more of a discussion. I don't know if like street epistemology is good for once it's already, you've already sort of tipped your hand and and it's already become argumentative. I know it's sort of like, trying to prevent it from getting into that territory. So I was wondering what kind of thoughts or advice you might have on that.
So are you asking whether or not street epistemology is a good idea to use once you've already started arguing, or kind of help me with the question?
Or not necessarily just street epistemology, but like what advice you might have in general for shifting things more from a debate to a discussion, where you're just calmly talking about what the reasons are for different beliefs rather than like sort of things getting heated and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess you're asking specifically about internet message boards. So I'll try to answer that question in the context of that, because the medium by which you approach conversation is going to affect the efficacy of your outcomes. So, for example, there is a 99% chance you're not going to change people's minds if you're talking to them on Twitter. Like, I fully believe that. I think out of all the possible social media platforms you could do it on, Twitter is just not the place. The character limit and the culture there is just not conducive for that kind of conversation. And it doesn't matter how right you are. You could be 100% right in every single thing you post, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to change people's minds. So one thing I would consider is, what is the actual platform which you're using by doing it? Is it a call-in show? Is it Facebook? How does that happen? So the longer form that you can get your text in, the better. I wish we could all write books about how we feel, but we don't do that. And even if we did, we wouldn't read them all anyway. So internet message boards are just kind of the place to go for a lot of people. And I like the message board format because it gives a lot of people a chance to respond on a single thread, and they can kind of take it different ways and bring in different sources and stuff. But if you're challenging the claim, I think a street epistemology approach is generally always going to be warranted. Defending the claim, that might be different, because you're going to have to bring in specific kinds of argumentation and citations to do that. But like challenging a claim or asking or verifying a claim, I think an SE approach, however you might define that, whatever tools you might bring from that, is probably the best way to do it. At least that's how I found a lot of my success. I'm happy when I get an email that says, "Hey, like I watched your show and I changed my mind about this topic." To me, that's a good thing. But I don't know if I've gotten that as much on like message boards or on. I definitely haven't gotten it on Twitter. Actually, there was one time I actually got something on Twitter. But that was because this other guy made a very wrong assumption about who I was and what I was doing, and changed his mind about that. But I don't know. What's your experience with this, Puck? What do you think?
Yeah, Twitter's the worst.
Yeah.
And part of that is because of the character limit, and like you said, possibly some of the environments that these are in. It's just not a really good place to have a good in-depth conversation. And if I were to want to have a deeper conversation with someone, I would want to do it on a platform that would allow both of us to have longer strings of messages to fully explain what we're actually talking about. It almost sounds like I'm describing our Discord. Plug our Discord, because on there you can find people who have positions, and there are places in some Discord servers where you can pull them aside and have a one-on-one, even voice conversation in some cases, where you can have a much longer form discussion. Now, what I have noticed works for me, as far as not letting it turn into a full-on everyone's just mudslinging at each other, I try to do my best to fully understand why my opponent might be convinced by their reasoning. It might not convince me, but I still want to do everything I can to, first of all, understand what their position is, and second, understand why they believe it's convincing enough that I should believe it too. One of the old rules about debate is if you can't defend your opponent's case for them, you don't understand the issue enough. And if you approach them with a sense of that, I want to understand what you're talking about first. I disagree, but I want to understand. Then it opens up the door to them understanding you and you saying, hey, okay, I gave you the space to talk. This is what I believe, and here's why. And there's a couple of YouTubers who are fantastic about having opposing views and having people on their shows who have very, very different views, but they are still able to talk with them in a civil way while still maintaining their ground. And I think part of that is trying to make sure you are understanding them as much as possible instead of just saying, well, here's why I think you're wrong. I would probably phrase that by saying, I can understand why you think that's convincing, but here's why I don't find it convincing.
There you go.
Or maybe echoing back their argument, can I make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying, and this is why you feel this way, and okay, that's a
fantastic thing to do. Repeat back what they said in your words to see if you had a good understanding of what they're representing.
Absolutely. People want to feel heard. People want to feel like they're being understood. And if you do understand them, your goal is to make sure that, yes, not only do I fully understand you, but it's because I understand you that I know that what you're saying is wrong or something, depending on what you're talking about.
And it also saves you the trouble of arguing a position that they don't hold. That can get extremely frustrating if especially we as atheists get this a lot where, oh, you're an atheist, so this is what you believe. No, it's not obvious that that's what I believe. And I'm not going to bother defending a position that I don't hold.
Actually, one thing that Dan said, one thing that Dan said was that the longer form that you're talking in, or that you're using to discuss, the less argumentative. And I haven't necessarily found that to be the case. Like sometimes it's like when you have enough room to respond to every single point, it becomes more of a you have to just basically respond in every single sentence in their post. You have to respond in your post, and then back and forth like that. And
that's a good point. That's a good point as well. The reason why I think I still hold to that is because you can at least you want to avoid the gish gallop. I think that's true. But Twitter is always going to be just shots firing at each other. It's always just shots firing at each other. And you can only say single phrases or just catchphrases even. That's the stuff that just gets people riled up and gets that emotional response. I think you're going to be less inclined to have that kind of emotional response when you're evaluating a fully written text rather than a few sentences meant to aggravate on Twitter. I think that's why I would still prefer it. But you are right. People will abuse the platform of the long form as well and make tons and tons of baseless claims. It's going to be a lot harder to kind of respond. And I guess at that point, you also have to evaluate, is this person going to be honest with you? And are they going to, really engage with the topic wholly? Or are they just going to throw another thing at you if you've disproved one thing? And that's something you got to figure out as you're having the conversation. So.
And then tying this back to the very first conversation we had, you don't owe anybody a debate. And if you're realizing that you're spinning your wheels and getting nowhere and it's just getting heated, I personally feel like there's no shame in saying, all right, well, it's been interesting, but I'm going to find some other conversations to have now. Thank you for your time. There are a number of conversations where you'll find you're stuck in one position, they're stuck in their position. There's some justification if it's in public by saying that by having this conversation, other people reading it are going to get something out of it. And if that's what justifies it for you, then fine. But if you're starting to lose your patience for the conversation, there's no obligation to continue having it.
There
That's
you
a
go.
good point.
All
Thanks,
right,
guys.
Dustin. Yeah, thank you for calling in. Really appreciate it, and thanks for sticking around with the ACA, as all of our callers have so far. Just really cool that we get to talk to some locals, some local
Good to
yokes.
talk to you.
Yeah,
I love that you called the ACA crew locals, and so far you're the only one who's
because the ACA is a worldwide community, Puck. We're not just in Austin.